Hi everyone, welcome to the very first Coffee and CEU of the year. My name is Annie Escalante. I am one of the board members of the Dissemination of Behavior Analysis SIG for ABAI. Welcome everyone. This is, I think, the biggest turnout we've ever had for a presentation, and I'm so excited that you're all able to make it today. Very quick housekeeping points, because I do want to get to our presentation as quickly as possible. For those who are brand new, we host Coffee and CEUs once a month, free for our members, and it's only about $15 to $20 to sign up for a year's worth of free Coffee and CEU events, which is pretty good. Let's see what else. And all proceeds go to the nonprofit, which is our SIG, to support our dissemination grant, one of our favorite endeavors. And the wonderful Maggie Pavone is actually one of our grant winners for this year. So I'm very happy she's here to start off the year for us. And I think without further ado, let's just pass off the baton to Maggie. Take it away.
Right. So I think I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Is that okay, Annie? I like a little bit of structure, so this will help me stay on track here. Okay, so this idea came from actually a town hall meeting that we had, was it ABAI last year? And I felt like it was a really important topic since a lot of us work or have worked or will work in the service of providing services and behavior analysis to people with autism. I think it's really important that we know what we're doing wrong and how we can do better. And I wanted to see if there was any interest in sharing the perspective of someone who has a diagnosis, so that it's not just neurotypical BCBAs thinking about what we should do, that we're actually listening to the community and getting some input. And I was so pleased that Brian and Dana and Armando were willing to share their perspective. We also had Travis and Ashton. I'm going to make sure I thank them as well. They weren't able to make it this morning, but they've included some of their thoughts in our presentation today.
No, I want you guys to stand here because it's really cold. If you get snowy wet, it'll be really miserable.
I can't see the chat, so I hope everything's going smoothly.
Hi everyone, if you don't mind, please mute yourself if you're not speaking on the panel. Thank you so much.
Okay. So just for our kind of agenda today, I wanted us to think about how we can generate professional development goals for improving our cultural competency when we do provide service to individuals that might have a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. I'm hoping that we'll all engage in some discussion related to diversity, inclusion, and equity in the service of those individuals. And then kind of the PECC relevant pieces. So we want to look at what are our ethical obligations to serve neurodiverse populations and how that ties into the opinions and experiences that are going to get shared today. So I'm kind of just the facilitator here. I'm Dr. Maggie Pavone, you can call me Maggie. I'm an IO psychologist and a board certified behavior analyst, and I teach behavior analysis at Lindenwood University in St. Charles. So I really, students, I push them really hard to be culturally competent practitioners and to, as Dr. Miller might say, to do better than just the task list. So I really enjoy my role here. But the show is not about me, it's about our panelists. So I'm gonna let them introduce themselves. And like I said, unfortunately, Travis wasn't able to make it this morning. If you get a chance, check out his page on Facebook, though. He does a lot of writing, and I think he's been on Rhino's show a couple times too. So his experiences are also very valuable and have helped me a lot. So Armando, Dana, Brian, you guys want to take it away?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Armando Bernal. I'm in Spring, Texas. I've been a BCBA since August. Before that, I was a special education teacher. In addition to working with a company called Action Behavior Centers, I work with a professor named Dr. Jenny Gans on a project at Texas A&M University. And it's been a lot of fun so far, just being a part of the field.
Dana, Brian?
I was going to go for alphabetical, but sure, I'll jump in. My name is Brian Middleton. I am currently studying for the big exam. 7-year special ed teacher. I should say 7+ years because student teaching counts. I have basically been, I encountered behavior analysis because I was running a behavior special education classroom, and for 4 years of that, I was muddling about and just trying to do my best to help basically my peers, my fellow students who are on spectrum, get that support that they needed. And when I encountered behavior analysis, I grabbed on with all my limbs and just tried to learn as much as I could because I saw the value of it. Right now, I am a senior behavior technician with a special role at a ABA company, and they're collaborating with me on creating an autism support school that is publicly certified. So that way, you don't have to have a lot of money to be able to send your kid there to get that extra support.
Awesome. Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Dana Affronti. I live in central Illinois, Springfield, really close to St. Louis. And I've been a BCBA since 2009. I went to Southern Illinois University in Carbondale. Enjoyed living on campus and, well, not living on campus, but living in Carbondale, and participating in Project 12 Ways, which is a parent training program for families with indicated histories of abuse and neglect. And then since graduating, I've worked across the lifespan, across populations, so dual diagnosis with adults, and then also young early intervention children, not just with autism. Then I've worked in autism clinics and all sorts of populations and settings. And I'm just really excited to be part of this group this morning.
Thank you so much. And again, I'm not going to harp on it too much, but I really, really appreciate you guys being willing to come and help me with this little project and share what you have learned and what you think we need to learn as well. So I thought this was just interesting piece from the diversity policy from ABAI, which says that we are supposed to be an organization comprised of people of different ages, races, nationalities, ethnic groups, sexual orientations, genders, classes, abilities, education levels. So I love that the DBA SIG really helps us connect with this type of community, and I hope that this is beneficial for all of us. So the first question that I asked the panel, and I'm gonna have to move this little guy over here, is what do BCBAs need to know about serving folks with autism? So here's some talking points, but again, I'm just gonna open it up and let Brian and Armando and Dana kind of answer this question for y'all.
So I wrote the very first line that progress, regardless of how small, can help this population understand that their achievements matter and that it can lead them to independence. A lot of times in my clinic, as well as just all around, we try and focus on the bigger picture, what can be accomplished, but each step needs a little bit of time. So any progress is progress at the end of the day, and just making sure that we understand that even if it's just they said one sound or one syllable, that is progress toward them eventually saying a word to a sentence and so on. So just remembering that progress matters and that it can go a long way.
Um, my point on this particular point is we need to remember our science. When it comes to applied behavior analysis, we are a science of observation, not a science of diagnosis. So while you may be working with somebody who is on the autism spectrum, um, that that diagnosis informs our programming, but ultimately what matters is the data we collect and whether or not the behaviors we're focusing on are socially significant. Socially significant has cultural characteristics. So one of my favorites that I talk about is eye contact. While some autistics it's less aversive to make eye contact. Eye contact is not the socially significant behavior we need to work on. The behavior we need to work on is body orientation, because across all cultures, it doesn't matter if you're in Japan or in the United States or in Europe or in Africa, when the listener orients their body towards the speaker, that indicates that there is listening going on. Now, in Japan and certain parts of Africa, eye contact is unacceptable because that's a challenge. That's saying that I am not just listening to you, I am calling you out. And so we don't need to worry about eye contact because, well, for example, I have a really good friend and coworker who is not on spectrum, and he's uncomfortable with eye contact. He is what you would call neurotypical, although I prefer neurological mean. That's more accurate, but he doesn't like eye contact, and he always apologizes for it. And I say, don't worry about it, man. You're moving your body towards me to tell me that you're listening. That works for me. And so again, diagnosis informs, but we are a science of observation, and will always be a science of observation. So
Brian, I kind of want that on a bumper sticker.
I should probably do that. Maybe that can be one of my "Oh Behave" swags. That's my podcast I put out this last week. So check it out, guys. Anyway, sorry, little side note there. But that's a big deal. And when we're helping people on the autism spectrum for the disorder, we need to worry less about what the diagnosis is and more about the socially significant behaviors and the data we collect.
Awesome. And then I wanted to just talk a little bit, sorry Jada, I wanted to jump back to Travis's part up here since he wasn't able to share. I know something that he really wanted to emphasize was the idea that therapy should not be, the goal shouldn't be to pass as anybody other than yourself. That actually we need to respect individuals, no matter, like Brian said, if they have a diagnosis or not, that trying to force someone to be someone that they're not is what he said, difficult and possibly dangerous. And I thought that was really insightful, so I wanted to make sure I shared that too. Dana, did you have thoughts on this one too?
Yeah, sorry, I'm having trouble finding my unmute button. I don't know why. Okay, so I really think that going off of both of those points, obviously, there's two different types of a disability, right? There's a medical model as a diagnosis as a disability of autism spectrum, and then there's a social model of autism spectrum. And we all have to have, well, most of us have to have paper documenting an autism spectrum diagnosis in order to provide medically necessary services, but that doesn't mean that necessarily we have to intervene on, or first and foremost, on everything that makes that individual meet the criteria of autism spectrum. So the individual with autism spectrum might engage in repetitive behavior. They might not make eye contact as frequently or as typically as a typically developing child might, but that doesn't mean that those behaviors in and of themselves are harmful. And then so that's the medical model, right? And then if you take the social model to say socially significant maladaptive behaviors, so maybe making hand flapping or repetitive body movements is socially significant today, but I would really like to see us as BCBAs start helping the larger community as a whole see maybe harmless repetitive motor movements, more socially normative. So we don't feel the pressure to possibly pass as normal and mask as much as we often do. And then that, in effect, possibly can change the social model of disability currently as the social community sees autism spectrum.
I would love to see us take that role too. I think we have a position of a kind of uniqueness where we could help normalize things. My mom always said normal was only a setting on the dryer, that all of us have a little bit of uniqueness. But definitely when we have a community that is saying, hey, we don't think this is abnormal, we don't want to change it, and it's not harmful, I think that's a really valuable insight as well. Thank you so much.
So along those points with that stereotyped or the movement and that sort of thing, 2 points. One, when we're worried about it too much, then we get behavior contrast or replacement behaviors that could be potentially harmful. For example, me, in my experience, that was not okay, and I got punished for it a lot as a kid, not from family, but from others around me. And I was socially aware enough to notice that, and so I replaced it without realizing it, with tensing my legs when I sit. And now in my 30s, I'm dealing with some medical side effects of that, which isn't so great. But in my special ed classroom, I actually created this little classroom where any kid was allowed. It didn't matter if they were special ed or not, and they would come and hang out during lunchtime. And a lot of kids would bring themselves there to just be a part of a little community inside of a larger school. And I had several kids who would stim during lunchtime. And I had a couple kids who were on the neurological mean come to me and say something about it. I said, that's just the way he is. And for maybe a week or two after that came up, somebody said something about that kid in front of the kid that I said that to. And that kid actually got in a fight defending my autistic kid, saying, that's just the way he is, leave him alone. And it was really awesome because it kind of created this beautiful domino effect of acceptance. And so now there are people in the community that are like, don't care, that's not important. What's important is that he's here.
That's awesome. I don't know if I can support encouraging fights at school, but that might be the exception.
Oh, I'm not encouraging it. In fact, I had to have a talk with him and be like, there's other ways that you could do it.
Give him some
but it was still really
behaviors.
Great.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I'm excited about the next question too, just because this is one that I really was hoping to hear the answers to. So our second question that we were going to start with was, what is it like to be on the spectrum and be involved in behavior analysis? And Armando, I'm sorry, I don't know why I put your talking points first every time. You do not have to talk first every time if you don't want to.
No, you're fine. It's been really great, right? So, I mean, what Dana and Brian were saying earlier is true. So growing up, I always thought that having autism was something to hide. So I never really embraced it a whole lot. So I would hide a lot of the things, or my motor stereotypy, I would try and hide that. But as I got older and I started accepting myself more, I realized that that's just makes me who I am. So now, like, I still stim, but I stim when I get really excited. And the people around me really love that, because especially, like, an example came up during Christmas, or I got a surprise visit to the zoo, and they were like, that's how we know you're really happy, because you start stimming and that you love that we got you this gift. So, like, it's those kind of things where we can start normalizing it. And being able to understand that side of treatment. I didn't get ABA treatment growing up, but I do understand how interventions can work. I did get some early interventions, and allowing me to let my therapist know, like, hey, that's okay if he is doing the motor stereotypy or what have you, but as long as it's in a a regular setting that it could be appropriate in, that because it just makes him who he is or she is. And I think that's really important to understand, that just because it may be different doesn't mean that we should hide it away, but just allow the individual to understand like when it is appropriate to do it, when it's not okay to do it. Because I mean, at the end of the day, I try to use myself as an example where if my friends, my significant other, my family can accept me for what I'm able to do in the normalized world and still be okay, then I don't see why that child can't be okay in the future and be just as successful in whatever they decide to do in their life.
I would think that would be so valuable as someone, as your client, right? To be able to look up to you and say like, wow, someone gets it and understands. When I read your piece, that's what I kept thinking is, wow, it must be so powerful to have that person in your corner who.
And I try to use that a lot when I was a teacher, because I'd have a lot of my students be like, you just don't understand, or like, I don't understand why this is happening. And then I can say, well, I've been where you have been much earlier, but I'm here to help you and support you and get you to understand like what you can accomplish in your life, which is anything you set your mind to.
To add to that, I didn't know I was autistic until I was in my mid-20s. And I have an official medical diagnosis, but I was misdiagnosed as nonverbal learning disorder. And it turns out the difference between nonverbal learning disorder diagnosis and Autism Spectrum disorder diagnosis is who's a specialist in your area when you're getting the diagnosis. So there's a lot of similarities, but there are definitely some key differences. And the specialist didn't have any knowledge about ASD or Asperger's syndrome, which not sure where I would have fallen, but I'm guessing it'd be somewhere between level 1 and 2, which would have been either Asperger's or ASD. So it's really fascinating to be in a field of science. I feel like I've been trying to find this field for my entire life, because it definitely coincides a lot with the thought patterns that I love, the way of looking at things, and it's been very punishing prior to this, going through school, all those different things, dealing with being just aware enough to know that I'm making mistakes, but not aware enough to know how to address them. I received early interventions as with a group called Scottish Rites, and apparently they were using ABA, and I didn't realize it until I talked to my mom about it. I'm sorry, I was incorrect there. Not early interventions. I was 14. But it was early. As soon as we had the diagnosis for nonverbal learning disorder, that support came in, and it was really fantastic. It helped me a lot. But the thing that I have to say about behavior analysis compared to any other group of people that I've interacted with is how amazingly welcoming behavior analysis is. In education, they talk a good talk, and sometimes they walk a good walk. But more often than not, it's just words without action. And I've been very surprised and pleased, especially because of my learning history, that behavior analysis has embraced me for who I am without worrying about little things. And it's fantastic. As a behavior analyst in training, I should say, it really helps with my kids, because a lot of our clients are autistic, to have that understanding. And sometimes that understanding takes it a step further. There's been a couple times when other behavior analysts have asked me to make special videos for their kids that I send privately, not using their names to protect for HIPAA and FERPA and all that good stuff. And I love doing that. And I will put them up for kiddos and make it so it's only a private link, so only those people who have that link can see the video. And then after I've gotten confirmation that it's been seen, I'll take it down, because that makes a big difference to have that understanding and that acceptance from somebody instead of just feeling like you're under a microscope.
I feel like that's kind of a theme, and it's funny because I don't think that came up when we were chatting last time as a small group, but that idea that, you know, whoever we're serving, whether they have a diagnosis or not, that our field has that optimism to be that person in their corner. I like that a lot. Thanks. Yeah, did you want to chime in on this one too?
Yeah, so I came into behavior analysis actually from the field of animal behavior, and animal behavior was one of my preferred topics, and I could talk your ear off endlessly about micro behaviors of dogs and what they meant, and you should have watched out because I knew you were going to get bit 10 minutes ago type deal. You know? And so I really always have been it's really been easy for me always to pay attention to the really, really tiny details of behavior. What's been difficult or different for me, I guess, on the spectrum is learning how my behavior should match the behavior of people. So I can communicate with dogs, but it's much more different to communicate with humans. Anyway, so I guess unlike Brian and Armando, I've really had a different feeling in the field, primarily because I have not been open about my diagnosis of autism spectrum. I was told that it would be a conflict of interest if I were to disclose that type of information. And so I've really struggled throughout my entire career being supported for my social differences. I feel that I'm a good behavior analyst, but the face-to-face discussions with parents and things like that were very, very difficult. And on occasion, I disclosed after a faux pas, you know, I have a diagnosis of autism spectrum. I'm really sorry that this happened. From now on, I would really like to, you know, discuss specifically about what the expectations are so we don't miss each other. I don't know. So again, I'm really excited in the last, 6 months or a year to have found the community of Brian and others. Ashlyn is on a group we have on Facebook, and really a community that is coming together to support and accept individuals on the spectrum, providing services for individuals on the spectrum. That's just been so amazing for me. And then as a professional behavior analyst with a diagnosis of autism spectrum, I think I come into some maladaptive behavior crisis type situations with a different perspective. You know, sometimes if I've had meltdowns, and meltdowns are never fun, and if I am in the middle of a meltdown, the only thing that I want to do is have the lights off, the noise gone, everybody away, just get out of my space and leave me alone and let me calm down, right? And so helping write behavior plans and helping teams develop a different perspective of what might be the best case scenario for an individual to recover from a crisis moment has really, I don't know, it's been interesting for me to be able to bring that perspective to the team, even though I'm not allowed to say that I have autism.
I hope you feel like you are allowed to soon. And I think
well, so now I am. Now I am. But it's been a long 10 years of really hiding. So I thank you so much, everybody, for this opportunity. I'm so excited.
Your bravery is just so admirable, and your enthusiasm is wonderful. So I'm so grateful that you made it through that journey, and that there's more to come. Okay, I'm going to move to the next one. What should the field do? This is kind of right off Dana's last answer. What do we need to do to foster more inclusivity and diversity?
Real quick, somebody on the chat asked, I'm curious why it would be considered a conflict of interest for you to disclose your diagnosis. I've actually been told that myself, and I rejected it. I think it's bull. Sorry. Sorry, not sorry. I don't think it's a conflict of interest. I think it's a reality. And I'm sure Dana has her own thoughts on that, so I'll shut up.
Okay, so I'm not as brave as Brian, and I take what important people say, like the Bible and like God, and I need to really work on that. And I am working on that, thanks to everybody here. But I was told that it was a conflict because who is it helping? Is it helping me or is it helping the client? If it's helping the client, that's no problem. But if it's helping me because of skill deficits, then it's a conflict of interest, and or it's a dual relationship. It's a conflict, and I shouldn't be disclosing. So, for example, I had it up on LinkedIn, and I had it on Facebook, and I had it on my resume, and I had it all over the place because I was running into these concerns with parents, misunderstanding what my role was, or me not completely explaining what my role was because I felt it was black and white, and it was completely my error. But or employers too, for that matter. Anyway, so I contacted the board, and the board indicated that it would be a conflict of interest if I disclosed to potential clients. And so all of those disclosures were removed.
Wow, that's really surprising to me.
Because I felt that my perspective of the situation was I was at fault. I did not know what I don't know. I was lacking something. I really don't not even able to today put a finger on it. But I feel that if I'm able to say, hey, I have autism spectrum, I work a little bit differently perhaps than most other people. I'm really black and white. If you have any questions, please ask. If you have any misunderstandings, please ask. I don't know. So that's what I was told.
I would love to see that framework be more generalized, that having a diagnosis, I mean, the things that you've just, all three of you have just answered for the last couple of questions, to me all seem like strengths in the field. Certainly not deficits, especially when we're, like you guys are saying, we're serving a population that really gets that. I'm saddened by that, but I hope that is changing.
It is, thank you.
I've also, Brian, I've also, so on this special ed teacher side of things, so I worked with elementary students, and a lot of times that's when the parents would find out that their child was diagnosed with autism. So unfortunately, a lot of the parents just felt like their child's life was over, that once they had this diagnosis of autism, that they'll have to take care of them for the rest of their lives, that there's nothing else that could be done. And I found that letting the parents know, like, hey, I have autism and I'm here. That at the time I was a teacher, now I'm a behavior analyst, still being able to help out the field, be able to help out these kids. And for me, it gave those parents hope. It gave them the ability to understand that just because a child's given a diagnosis doesn't mean that their life is over, that they can't do anything in their lives. If anything, it provides them with a different insight that can give them the ability and opportunity to do anything that they want in their life, while also still seeing things differently that other maybe neurotypical people may not see. So that is really surprising to me that people have told you that. But in my experience, it provides hope, and that's something I don't want to take away from the parents, that there is this possibility, if not the ability, for their kids to still succeed. Because why couldn't they succeed as long as we're still there to help them?
And being a female on the spectrum, I was diagnosed in middle school, and all I saw around me were these, teenage boys who had all this interest in Pokemon and whatever else, and it was not me, and I couldn't find any fit for me and my diagnosis, and what people were saying was the reason I was different than everybody else. And believe me, I knew I was different than everyone else. And I went to hear Leon Holiday Wiley talk, and I just had realization that this was actually what I was diagnosed with, and somebody else actually understood what it was like to live with this and be in a social situation like middle school and high school. And so for me, having somebody tell me their perspective that I could relate to was very, very, very helpful and therapeutic, I guess. And maybe it's the perspective that if I tell a client that and then they suddenly improve or whatever, then it's messy behavior analysis. But you know what? I'm not really in the field of research. I'm in the field of helping humans. And if I can help a human by tactfully disclosing here and there, then I would love to say, what's the problem?
Get another bumper sticker. I'm in helping humans. I'm in the business of helping humans. I love that.
People write this stuff down. I can't remember it all. So along those lines, something to understand is there's a delineation. There's autism spectrum disorder and autism, and one is a neurotype and another is a disorder of the neurotype. Just like depression disorder is a disorder that affects all neurotypes, autism spectrum disorder affects people who are autistic. And that's, once I made that connection and realization, it really helped me. But one of the reasons why I think it's not a conflict of interest for us to reveal our diagnosis is that, well, our science is a science of behavior, and behaviors can be learned. And while there are definitely genetic factors, ontogeny, right? I think I'm getting it right. I'm still making sure I'm mixing those up or not. But our ontogeny informs our behavioral repertoire, correct? That's the premise of behavior analysis. And so it's more ethical for us to be taking into account ontogeny when we're trying to teach behaviors and learning new behaviors. But along those lines, it's also important to understand that if an individual who has ASD sees exemplars of an adult with ASD who is successful, then that's a part of our science, right? Seeing exemplars of what is and what isn't. So I don't think that there is a conflict of interest there. If I were using it as a way of manipulating or controlling other people and getting them to do things that I wanted, that's a totally different story. But when I bring up my autism, it's typically in parent trainings, or it's typically in circumstances where it's an opportunity to help one of my clients. And it helps a lot because they see the exemplar and they go, oh, I can be like that. And I'm like, well, no, don't be like me. I don't want you to be like me. Be you. But still, like, that exemplar makes a big difference. And that is a part of behavior analysis. And so my point that I keep on coming back to on my podcast, on my Facebook page is, trauma-informed care is default ABA. It's the way ABA should be done. And likewise, this sort of understanding is the way that ABA should be done. Because we haven't done it in the past is mainly because we're dealing with research-based versus real world. But the research backs up that we should be taking this approach.
Right. And I think Travis also had said, one of the important answers to this question was to listen and ask questions, not to assume, to really ask those real questions like, what is it like? What is important to you? What's it like to be you? And not just to put those answers in some kind of checkbox or checklist or diagnostic protocol, but to really listen to what the human in front of you is saying is important to them. So I wanted to share his perspective on that too. I hear the awkward silence, so I'm going to move on, but you guys can always jump in and tell me if I'm going too fast. So I don't like to ask negative questions, but I felt like this one needed to be asked. So in you guys' opinion, how is the behavior analysis community failing to serve the community? And what can we do, I stole from Dr. Miller, to #do better at serving that population? And maybe I'm going to rephrase it. What are some learning opportunities that we could capitalize on? Bring the precision teaching out of me rather than failures. But what do you guys think?
So when I was reading this question, I never thought of the ABA field as doing any kind of failure, but rather it's growing, right? It's still a very young field and it's still learning new things. And when I was writing out the answer, I was focusing more on the normalization of that ASD being to start overshadowing that negative stigma partner with the diagnosis. I've mentioned that several times where parents think their child's life is over, or there's that idea that the child with autism can't do things. And I don't believe that to be true at all. I feel like everyone here is a living statement of that we're able to accomplish still all of our goals. Joining a group like this, I think, is a really important first step. It allows us to say, like, hey, these people are talking and we're able to talk about autism in such a normalized way. Just like it's just a part of Brian or myself or Dana, it just makes us who we are. Often I've gone into interviews for jobs or different volunteer services, and I mentioned that, oh, hey, I have autism. And there's always this shock on people's faces that, oh, you have autism, but you're in special ed, or you're trying to be a behavior analyst and things like that. And that's fine. But I've also felt like it shouldn't really make a difference in an interview. It should just be something that's brought up when they say, tell me more about yourself, kind of thing, instead of just being surprised by it. I wish that there were more behavior analysts and more special ed teachers that had autism or different diagnosis or different disorders. So that way these children can see all types of people, helping them to succeed. Because there's not always just going to be a classroom full of children with autism. There's classrooms with people with anxiety or intellectual disabilities and things. And having teachers, behavior analysts, and all other kinds of occupations help children understand that just because they have this condition or diagnosis does not make that person, if anything, it helps them see more of the world and understand things that maybe other people don't, and contribute just as much, if not more.
I can't help but think you're talking directly to me. I feel like my role as a university professor and a behavior analyst should be to help shape the repertoires of individuals who have diagnoses to become successful parts of the field. And I don't know that there's a lot of us doing that. Maybe we need to do a talk in the TBA listserv too.
Yeah, definitely.
But I think, we all say that we are able to teach people skills that they need. So maybe we do need to look at reaching out to the verified core sequences and saying, how can we support more people who feel that they have a diagnosis but could be an excellent contributor in this field? How do we help them succeed? I'd love to see that happen.
So the way that I think that behavior analysis could do better is we need to be more consistent with our science. I am sick and tired of hearing about companies that use aversive DTT at the table. I am so tired of it because it's not even using our science right. They're having a kid at a table and forcing them to touch this, do that, do this, that, touch that, and thinking that we're going to do physical restraint or physical blocking. That's not functional. There's no real communication going on there, and that's pairing with punishment. We want to pair it with reinforcement. I can't harp on this enough. Pairing with reinforcement is such a huge thing in making behavior change. The adults that made major changes in my lives were people who, yes, they sometimes had to deliver hard messages, but I always knew that they were on my side. I always knew that even if they were saying something hard or difficult, that they had my best interest at heart. But when we're talking about little kids at a table, or somebody who's nonverbal and they're being blocked from communicating and they're not being taught, their requests for a break, their escape maintained behaviors are not being honored. And so therefore they go into other behaviors to try to escape. That's trauma creating. That's not ABA. That's adhering rigidly to a science. And it's really funny because one of the things that the behavior analysts that we try to address is rigidity within autism. But rigidity comes, in my opinion, from learning history, because the autistics that I've encountered and worked with, and it's not universal, everybody's different, but the autistics that I've encountered who've been very loved and accepted, they're not rigid. They're very flexible because they're not constantly punished. In my experience, my rigidity that I had to overcome and deal with all came down to the fact that I was constantly punished over and over and over and rarely reinforced. And I'm going to make a quick shout out to my parents on this, because they did a fantastic job. They did make mistakes. There was a learning process there, but they always were willing to adapt and overcome. And I'm convinced my dad's on spectrum. I've convinced him because he's making some changes in his life. And it turns out that by making those changes, he's becoming less rigid because he has also a learning history, and it makes a big difference.
And I think this was Travis's point too. That he said one of the areas where the community really could do better is serving folks with Asperger's or who would be considered high functioning, which I think just brings us back to the idea that we're a science of human behavior, not diagnostic behavior. So what's socially significant to that person, regardless of their diagnosis, is something that we should be focusing on fostering, and hopefully doing it in a way that is humanizing and reinforcing and positive as much as possible.
And a lot of insurance companies, I think, are moving to like medical necessity based upon maladaptive behavior. And I think as we move forward in opening the discussion and opening the acceptance of the behavior that makes an individual meet the diagnostic criteria of autism, as more as that gets to be acceptable, we might start being able to see a shift in realizing that the significant maladaptive behaviors that we often see is a trauma response, just like Brian said, and it's not that. I think that is the point of intervention, is how to change the antecedent environment to help the individual learn in a receptive and positive environment. And if we can set the environment up for success, then the individual trauma response possibly goes down, and they have the opportunity to learn because they're not constantly in flight or flight.
That's a brilliant insight. Again, thank you all for sharing with this group. I'm learning a lot, and we already chatted, and I'm learning more from just the second iteration of this conversation. I just wanted to talk quickly about this not just being like a hobby interest of mine. I feel that becoming more culturally competent in whatever role of service provision that you have is it's one of our obligations as part of this field. We have several ethical compliance codes that I think directly push us to engage in things like these discussions, to ask questions and listen closely to the answer that we're given. So I pulled a couple that I thought were most applicable. Obviously, boundaries of competence. I was telling a story right before we started this panel about the idea that I'm on a lot of diversity, equity, inclusion kind of committees at my university, and it's usually a bunch of cisgendered, white, middle-aged females talking to each other about it. And I don't know that makes us more competent, right? I think it's kind of like an echo chamber. So I think that when we undertake appropriate study, as this PECC code implies, that means learning from people who have something to teach us. So thank you for being a teacher for me today. I think it's very helpful. I think the next two you guys have made really clear in the previous discussion, that we have an obligation to put the rights of the client before our rigid expectations or before our kind of standard protocol. We need to actually think about what is important to the client and what rights they have to effective and humanizing treatment. And I think we can do that by involving clients in planning and consent, and really listening to clients when they say no. I teach I teach my students, you know, you can have the best behavior plan in the world, and if that client says they don't want to do it, unless there's a reason that they are in immediate danger, you now have to change your plan. Because that involvement, I think, is another piece where we can do better and we can move towards being more culturally competent. And then obviously promoting an ethical culture. I think that these talks and learning this way can help us make those antecedent environments more effectively, and make ethical cultures where people can behave in the way that's important to them and continue to learn. Okay, so then the six of us had put out a little poll around Facebook. Perhaps you have seen it if you're here listening, but we just asked for some more questions. So some of the ones that we got, I went ahead and put up, and then we're going to open it up to some. I think we still have time, right? Yeah, we still have a little bit of time. So I wanted to get to these questions, but then also give the opportunity for y'all in the audience to benefit from Brian and Armando and Dana's expertise. But some of the questions that were submitted beforehand were, what do you think current research priorities should be? You talked about the research practice gap, so what should we be researching if that's our role?
I think Brian wanted to bring up a question that Kelsey had mentioned in the chats before. Brian, if you want to go ahead and do it.
Perhaps we should address this one and then do that one next, since it's already been vocalized.
Okay.
My personal opinion on research is we need to focus on research applied to classroom settings, to early interventions for classrooms in relation to social acceptance, early interventions for kids. My bragging rights as a special ed teacher. So I was a mild mod special ed teacher, and I was given the hardest of the hard kids, but I didn't exclude any kids who wanted that extra support. I didn't care what their diagnosis was. And I created an inclusive classroom, a safe place where the kids could go in the school. And with the mild mod kids, especially the behavior kids, we achieved for 3 years running 100% inclusion in the classroom. With the exception of a couple teachers, and I hate to say this because it sucks, but the administration, I had full buy-in from the school. I was teaching behavior analytic principles to teachers. They were wanting me to teach them to them. They were accepting them. My favorite was having a conversation with a history teacher and explain to him functions of behavior. And then I just had the feeling that I should tell him the important thing that we all learn, which is pretty basic, which is the reason behaviors occur the way they do is because of the person's learning history. And he's like, wait, stop. Oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. And his entire teaching style shifted from that point forward. And instead of it being him coming to me about problems, he would come to me asking for suggestions and solutions. And it was amazing and life-changing. And I think that's where the research needs to focus.
That's wonderful. I have a student who just graduated last year who's really looking at replicating it and also kind of extending a lot of the work on alternatives to escape extinction. And I feel like that's one of those areas that you're talking about, where the research needs to actually look at what happens to those humans that are being helped by this, rather than just what works as far as an experimental design.
I think that research should also focus on the transition. So coming from a school background and then going into a clinical setting and understanding that disconnect that comes from both sides. The clinic isn't sure what goes on in the school system, while the school system doesn't want anything to do with an ABA clinic. And understanding that transition is super important, that the clinical setting is the most restrictive that a child can be in, and we're trying our hardest to get them back into the school setting. Well, what happens to those kids once they get from a clinic to a school? Are they progressing? Are they not? And then understand, just opening those eyes and making sure that everyone is talking to each other. I feel like that's probably where a big issue lies, is when the ABA clinic is doing their hardest to model what a school system does, but then that school system says, no, we do things completely differently. And that could have been avoided if everyone was just talking to each other. So the more research we have with that, hopefully the better the transition would be and the more progress those children would make.
Awesome. Yeah, I don't think we have a good history as a field of talking to each other, of collaborating well. So I agree. I think that's a really important research priority, is how do we collaborate with other settings, other disciplines, other humans, all of that. Do we want to go to the chat question? I don't have the chat up because it's just
I'll
too much.
go ahead, I'll bring it up. So Kelsey asked, can we go back to the point, the rigidity point? Is it someone's experience? Sorry, I'm having a hard time reading right now. Is it everyone's experience that the routines themselves are not reinforcing? Is that they're avoiding novel experiences because novel experiences have been paired with punishment? To answer that question, yes, I think so. I don't think that's the only explanation. I'm sure there's other things that might be going on, internal events and that sort of thing. But one of the things that I do with kiddos that I work with is a lot of times I'll be put on lunches to work with kids, just kind of hang out with them for lunch. And so at the end of December, beginning of January, I thought it'd be kind of fun to do a little experiment. And so for a week, I brought curries with me to have at lunch, and I would sit and eat with the kids. And they'd be like, that smells different. That's interesting. And I'd say, would you like to try some? So, before I take a bite, I put some on a plate and let them try it. And interestingly, universal acceptance of curries, 4 or 5 different types. And along those lines, I've also run this experiment with 3 different kids over years of I'm paired with them as reinforcing. And I introduce them to a new thing, a thing that most people hate, black licorice. A lot of people hate black licorice. And I introduce it to them after having very positive interaction with them. And I have 100% success out of 3 trials, or individuals, I should say, of acceptance of and enjoyment of black licorice. I think it's a lot more to do with the paired reinforcement than it is to do with the fact that someone likes or dislikes something. That being said, it's only 3 trials, 3 data points. And some people may just not like the flavor, but the point being that I think that rigidity does have a lot to do with paired with punishment. I personally hate line dancing. I can't stand it. And it's because my high school bullies line danced, and they would never stop talking about it. And so I think that, I paired that with punishment. Maybe I can try something new. I don't know.
I think Aubrey Daniels talks about becoming an SD. And it sounds like you've kind of done that for your kids, right? You've paired yourself with so many prompts that have then led them to reinforcement, that now you can perhaps push them and ask them to do something that they wouldn't necessarily have done without that. But you've signaled that reinforcement might be available, so maybe we'll give it a try. I like that a lot.
Definitely.
Is there any skill that's commonly taught that you would rather were taught differently or not at all?
I would love to see eye contact and repetitive motor behaviors taken off of all treatment plans, unless repetitive motor movements are significantly harmful. I think maybe that eye contact is can be measured. Eye contact might be able to be measured by like probe data or something along that way to indicate the learner's reinforcement history with the provider or their level of engagement in an activity or something along those lines. But as far as a direct look at me program with physical prompting, etc., it's horrible. I don't have any other words other than it's so frustrating to see. And then the repetitive motor movements, unless they're significantly harmful, or the individual has requested them to be addressed, I think that they shouldn't be addressed. If you look at the research, the learning rates for direct instruction and things like that, they don't even look at, they don't target repetitive motor movements when they're doing direct instruction, but the repetitive motor movements decrease naturally. And so if we don't directly focus on them, we might see gains, or we will see gains if the research is correct, in both eye contact and repetitive motor movement.
Dana, somebody in the chat asked, what does harmful mean in this context?
So harmful would be to sell for others.
So basically SIB, that sort of thing.
Repetitive motor movement of head banging, then that's difficult. We have to address it because it's harmful to others.
One of the things that I think that we need to change is this idea of continuous ongoing compliance. It's not real world. It's holding an expectation to somebody with a neurological difference that regular kids, regular adults, regular individuals on the neurological mean are not held to. It's basically priming kids for being victims. It's creating circumstances where they don't have autonomy, where we're programming robots, not people. And that's just not real world. Does that mean we have to honor the no, I'm not interested all the time? Well, you know what? Sometimes I'm not interested in going to work, guys. Sometimes I don't want to go. And even though I love my job, and guess what? Sometimes the answer is, well, you kind of gotta. But if you go to work, Brian, then at the end of the day, you can pick up that really great yogurt you like, or something like that. It's creating cooperation. It's creating people who could make decisions for themselves instead of robots. It's including, and so sometimes I'll have a kid say, I don't want to do this anymore. And I'd say, thank you so much for telling me that. How about we do 3 more, like if it's a number that's 3, or maybe like 1 more minute, and then we'll go do the thing that you want. And it's teaching tolerance. It's teaching the ability to tolerate different things in the environment that we may or may not want to be involved with, and that's real world. Another thing that I would like to see added is I would like to see added more time in nature. Me as a kid, my parents went out of their way to make it so that we could have access to nature. If it weren't for my dogs, I would be dead. I'm not kidding. There were times when I literally had a knife to my wrist and was ready to cut, and my dog would come up and nuzzle me, and be a part of, just help me overcome those challenges. And nature is a big deal, and I feel like we're in the society today disconnecting from it. There's a lot of pretty neat up-and-coming research coming out about the nature effect on the mind and the body, and a lot of times we're in a center, we're at a table, we're not moving around. It's very sluggish. And so I'll be like, let's go for a walk. Let's go to the park. Let's go check out some things while we're walking along. One of my favorite things is teaching discrimination skills. My company, we did a hike, and I was really excited because I was allowed to bring one of the littles along, And I'll be honest, about 50% of the hike was the kid was on my shoulders. But I was showing him how to find rocks and meet new plants and all sorts of really cool things. And it was a naturalistic opportunity for environmental discrimination. And so I took a little bit of data on that just out of curiosity. It wasn't a program. And then every time I worked with that kid from that point forward, I also kept an eye on the frequency that they were engaging with their environment. And interestingly enough, not only were they looking for rocks and other cool things, they were also noticing cars. They were noticing the streets and stopping before looking both ways, which was a program. But after that, it was a more natural program because they noticed it, because they were looking at their environment and being engaged in it. And so, yeah, I really wish nature-based interventions were more thoroughly included, not just naturalistic, but like being in the world.
Armando, I want to pick your brain on this one, since you have that teaching background. Is there ever like an IEP goal or a goal for a student you're like, I'm not teaching that, no way. I'm going to teach this other thing that's more important?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times when I was teaching, and even now in the clinic, my children I work with are anywhere between 18 months to 6. And I try and think to myself, okay, how is this going to benefit him later in life? So I would take time to teach them, like, one of the skills that they have to learn is to memorize a number sequence. Well, that number sequence can then go into learning your mother's phone number, or it can be learning your address and things like that are important. I think it's very important to understand what is appropriate for that child's age and how is that going to help them later in life. I've always tried to consider that, especially when talking to parents, because they're like, I've had parents that do like pretend bites or things like that with their children because they think it's cute because they're 2 or 3 years old. And then I try and remind them, okay, well, it's cute now, but what happens when they're 3 going on 13 to 23? Is it still going to be cute at 23 years old? And a lot of the parents, especially at the young ages, don't realize that. Like, they don't ever think that, wow, my kid is going to be 16 one day, and are they going to be able to do, math, or are they going to be able to do typical skills that a normal 16-year-old would do? And it's sort of been surprising with my therapists I work with now, because they've never thought about that before, that I say that they need to know these community helpers, because what if they get lost in the grocery store, or what if they get lost on the street? And they're like, oh, whoa, that's, really scary. I was like, well, it's scary, but it could be true. And we have to remember that. So keeping in mind these different things that we can apply, in a clinical setting, but like Brian said, the natural world is so important, because that's where they're going to be. My clinic stops with our assistants at 6 years old, and then they either go to another clinical setting or they can go into the school setting. So I've tried to use as much as my time to make sure that these kids have very basic skills that they can have and remember for the rest of their lives, and hopefully in a dangerous situation, they can remember it and be okay.
That's wonderful.
Just a quick note, somebody posted a post from ABA Desk's blog. Bleh. Jane Laganova is a friend. She's actually going to be on 2 of my podcasts that are up and coming. And she is a neurodiverse too. She's ADHD neurodiverse. And so she's got some really awesome perspectives. And I was really excited to see that. I like to call ADHD, though, extreme multitasker. I think that's a lot more positive. Also, there was a question that one of the attendees asked. Can we speak a bit about funding in your state for adult services and how that may help or hinder you receiving services? The fact of the matter is that in my experience, adult services for individuals on autism, especially people who are, quote, high functioning, is non-existent. They're frequently the people who are getting the supports and services, they're getting them through insurance and that sort of thing, and they're very frequently being pushed towards the cognitive behavioral / Freudian folks instead of folks like us. And And definitely cognitive behavioral and DBT have their positives and benefits, especially in relation to ACT and cognitive behavioral therapy, which ACT is as much ABA as it is CBT. But I feel like we have some solutions and some answers to folks, not just autistic folks, but all sorts of folks that ABA, because it's been kind of due to following the money, been pigeonholed into making it so that services are only being put within this narrow range, and if it doesn't fall within that range, then it's not going to be provided. That's why I think that private organizations are going to be key towards making this change. One of my goals is to start a private company that pays its people, treats them well, does what they're supposed to, but then takes its profits and puts it towards a nonprofit to support and help kids and adults actually access services. Because in my experience, government makes it cost 3 times as much and be half as effective. And I'm sure that a lot of you folks already know about that. Dealing with Medicare or TRICARE or those sorts of things where it's just not efficient. It's a pain in the butt. I think that we just need to have people step up and make a difference. And one of my things that I love is community-based behaviors and understanding communities. And I think that we need to be more community-oriented. I think we need to connect with each other better.
But united,
I'm sorry.
Right? We might be able to make a bigger difference as people who have the same goal.
And I'm sorry if I'm talking so much. I like talking, as you can tell. I had a discussion with somebody a while back about autism and vaccines, and they pointed out that the Amish community doesn't have as many people who are autistic. And I said, well, first off, you're making a big assumption there. But let me go ahead and make an assumption in response to your assumption. What if the reason why the Amish communities and Mennonite communities have less incidence of autism is because they're a more inclusive community? What if that guy Hamish who lives down the road, who knows how to build barns without looking at plans and is very fascinated by the local insects, is just another member of the community, and his unique quirks are accepted and cared for and loved instead of being isolated and pushed away? And I have a little bit of experience with that, not a ton, but I have been around folks who are Mennonite or Amish, and I have noticed that they tend to be a very close-knit and inclusive community. So maybe that's something we need to do research on, how those close-knit communities address autism instead of creating diagnoses and creating disorders.
Kind of feel so. I'm gonna go ahead and call myself out as part of like the geek nerd culture, because that's also somewhat like a small, very supportive community, and I feel like that would totally happen. Like maybe they don't have a diagnosis, but certainly several people that I play video games with could if they were not being received well from our social community. So that's a really that made me think, Brian. Thanks for pushing me a little bit today.
Well, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but it seems as if we've gone over time.
So sorry.
No, it's okay. I just want to be conscious of everyone's time, all the attendees. But thank you so much for today's presentation, today's panel. This has been unbelievably informative. Thank you for posting this. I was going to ask if there's a way for folks to reach out to all of you in case they have other questions or comments, or if they want to spark up a chat with you concerning these topics. I'm so glad you have this posted up.
Dana, Armando, Brian, one more live shout out, thank you. And of course, the DBA SIG for this opportunity. I've learned a lot. I hope everyone else did too.
Thank you so much for attending, and please know that we host these once a month, so you are more than welcome to come. And if you have any questions, please reach out to us at disseminateaba@gmail.com, and we'll be more than happy to answer any questions or direct you to the wonderful presenters today. Thank you again for attending, and I hope you have a wonderful weekend. Bye-bye, take care. And I'll adjust the CE time for the extra amount of time that you presented. No, this is great. The topic was so good.
I could have listened to you guys talk for quite a bit longer, so I'm glad you cut us off. Have a good Sunday, everyone.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.